Rain poured relentlessly over Manhattan, blurring the skyline into a watercolor of gray glass and sorrow. Inside the towering headquarters of Bennett and Cole, Grace Holloway sat in silence, her trembling hands resting on a stack of divorce papers. 7 months pregnant, wrapped in silk sleeves that could not hide her shaking, she stared across the long marble table at her husband, Marcus Bennett, a man whose voice could slice through hope like a blade through glass. His Mont Blanc pen clicked rhythmically, a metronome of control. "Sign it," he said coldly. "Let's end this farce." Around him, lawyers and assistants watched like vultures waiting for the carcass to still. Beside him sat his mistress, a young PR executive, who smiled faintly as she fixed her lipstick using her iPhone camera. The scent of her perfume burned in Grace's throat. She looked down at her name printed in black ink, Grace Holloway Bennett, a name she once believed would last forever. Her heartbeat thundered as she tried to breathe. Then Marcus spoke again, each word a calculated cruelty. "Don't think this baby changes anything. For all I know, it's not even mine." Silence consumed the room. The sound of rain filled the void. Grace's throat tightened, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. She wanted to scream, to throw the pen, to shatter the illusion of control that he wrapped around her like a noose. But she didn't. Instead, she picked up the pen and signed. Every stroke of ink felt like burying her old self. Marcus leaned back, satisfied, whispering something to the mistress that made her laugh softly. When Grace finally stood, she looked at him. Her eyes steady despite the tears burning behind them. "You'll regret this," she whispered. His smirk deepened. "I doubt that." Outside, the city waited for her downfall. Flashbulbs burst like lightning as paparazzi caught the moment she walked into the rain, mascara bleeding down her cheeks, designer heels sinking into puddles. To Manhattan, it was scandal. To Grace, it was an ending. Her phone buzzed in her purse, a notification from the bank. "Your account has been suspended." She froze, realization cutting through her like ice. Marcus had frozen her funds. Her world collapsed in silence. The people on the street passed without glancing, umbrellas shielding them from the storm that had already swallowed her whole. She pressed her palm to her belly, whispering, "It's just us now. You and me." Somewhere deep within, her child kicked, as if answering. The thunder rolled above, merciless and alive. Then, through the blur of rain and headlights, a voice called her name. "Grace!" It was Ava Cole, her oldest friend, now a lawyer, running toward her with an umbrella in one hand and a soaked envelope in the other. "Don't faint. Someone's been trying to reach you all morning," Ava said, breathless. Grace blinked, disoriented. "Who?" Ava handed her the envelope, the gold initials already smudged by rain. "A man named Graham Hale. He says he's the executor of your mother's estate. He needs to meet you today, before midnight." Grace frowned. "My mother's estate? Ava, she died when I was 15. She had nothing left." Ava's expression softened. "Apparently not nothing. He said it's urgent and it could change everything." Grace stared at the trembling paper in her hand. Rainwater dripping from its edges. For the first time that day, something fragile, hope, flickered beneath her ribs. But as she lifted her head, she noticed a black Mercedes parked across the street. Inside, a man in a dark coat raised his phone, snapped a photo of her, and murmured into an earpiece. She signed, "Proceed to Phase 2." The next morning, sunlight washed the city clean, but Grace couldn't feel it. She sat in Ava's small downtown office, her eyes swollen, the unopened envelope clutched like a lifeline. Ava set down 2 steaming coffees. "Drink this. You look like you haven't slept in days." Grace tried to smile. "I haven't. Every time I close my eyes, I see his face when I sign those papers." Ava exhaled, her tone sharp but kind. Then stop seeing him. See the woman who walked away! Grace finally tore open the envelope. Inside was a single letter, embossed with the initials H.H., Hartwell Holdings, her mother's initials. The handwriting was elegant, formal, and slightly haunting. She read aloud. Miss Holloway, as executor of your late mother's estate, I must inform you that your inheritance conditions will activate on your 30th birthday. However, an early release may be granted under specific circumstances, one of which has just occurred. Grace froze. Her mother's estate? A trust? This made no sense. She looked up, bewildered. Ava leaned closer. Grace, this could be huge. Your mother was part of the old Hartwell family trust. That's Manhattan old money. Maybe she hid it to protect you. Before Grace could respond, the desk phone rang. Ava answered, frowned, then pressed a button. Mr. Hale, she said, you're on speaker. A deep, steady voice filled the room. Miss Holloway, this is Graham Hale. I handle the Hartwell estate. You are the sole surviving heir. Grace blinked, stunned. That can't be right. It's not only right, Hale replied, but you must listen carefully. The trust can only transfer if you prove yourself financially and emotionally independent. No spousal dependency, no shared assets, and no psychological instability that could endanger the heirs. Ava raised her eyebrows. Heirs? As in, her child? Correct, Hale said. If you can demonstrate full guardianship and stability within 12 months, the trust will activate. Its value exceeds $50 million in diversified assets. Grace's breath caught. 50 million. Before she could speak, Hale's tone shifted. Lower. Urgent. Miss Holloway, someone else already knows. My system was breached this morning. An anonymous inquiry about your eligibility came through. Ava stiffened. Marcus, she muttered. Grace's pulse quickened. He'll try to prove I'm unstable, unfit to be a mother. Hale's voice was calm but firm. Then you must stay composed. The trust's observers are watching. If you're seen as volatile, the board could freeze your claim. Cry in public, shout or break, and it's over. Grace stared at the floor, tears filling her eyes. So if I grieve, I lose everything? Hale's reply was quiet, almost fatherly. You must look powerful, Miss Holloway. Your mother believed you would rise when everyone expected you to fall. Don't prove her wrong. The line went dead. The only sound left was the hum of the city outside. Grace looked at Ava, her reflection mirrored in the office window. Pale, exhausted, but alive. Ava reached across the desk, resting her hand over Grace's. Then we fight smart. We rebuild quietly. You'll get through this. Grace turned back to the skyline, where the rain had begun again, soft and steady, like the echo of her own heartbeat. In that fragile silence, something inside her shifted. Not forgiveness, not yet courage, but resolve. That night, as the storm returned to Manhattan, Grace sat alone by her apartment window. The city lights flickered on the glass like ghosts of everything she had lost. Marcus believed he had destroyed her, that by taking her money, her name, and her pride, he had ended her. But what he didn't know was that endings sometimes plant the seeds of beginnings. As the thunder rolled and rain traced the outline of her reflection, Grace whispered to her unborn child, "They think we're finished, but we're just getting started." And outside, unseen through the storm, a black car idled by the curb. Inside, a man lifted his phone, his voice low and certain. Phase 2 confirmed. Send it to Bennett. The storm raged on. The city never slept. And Grace Holloway, the woman the world had just watched break, was about to rise. The storm had passed, but the city still smelled like rain. That faint scent of electricity and aftermath, the kind that lingers when something has been destroyed and remade. Grace Holloway stood before the entrance of a marble building on Park Avenue, her reflection mirrored in the glass doors. The engraved brass plaque read, "Graham Hale and Associates, Legal Estates and Trusts." For a moment, she hesitated. The city behind her was rushing, indifferent, alive, cars splashing through puddles, umbrellas colliding on sidewalks. Inside, her future waited in ink and law. She took a slow breath, one hand resting on the curve of her belly, and pushed open the door. The office smelled like cedar and paper, old money. Books lined the walls. Portraits of people she didn't recognize stared down at her like silent judges. A receptionist guided her into a private room where a tall man in a gray vest stood by the window, reviewing a stack of files. Graham Hale, silver-haired, mid-60s, carried the calm authority of someone who had seen every kind of human collapse and still believed in redemption. "Miss Holloway," he greeted, extending a hand. "I'm glad you came. Your mother would have been proud." Grace blinked. "You knew her?" He nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Eleanor Hartwell wasn't just a client. She was a force, the kind of woman who could make a room fall silent without raising her voice. And she always believed you would carry that same strength, though she worried life would test it too early. Grace lowered her gaze, the mention of her mother slicing through the years like glass through silk. "It already has." Hale gestured for her to sit. He placed a sealed folder in front of her, its edges worn with time. "Inside is your mother's final amendment to the Hartwell Trust. She instructed that if you were ever forced to stand alone, emotionally, financially, or as a mother, the estate should be released early. You've met those conditions sooner than anyone expected." Grace stared at the folder. "How much are we talking about?" $50 million, Hale said plainly. "In assets, stocks, and holdings under your control. But it won't be easy. The trust's activation period is monitored by an external board, your mother's old business partners. For 12 months, they will assess your independence. If they find evidence of instability, manipulation, or relapse into dependency, the inheritance will freeze permanently." Grace laughed softly without humor. "So basically, I can't afford to fall apart." Hale's expression softened. "No one can. But most of us don't have an audience waiting for us to fail." Outside the window, the sky was heavy with post-storm light, pale gold seeping through clouds. Hale leaned forward. "Marcus Bennett has already filed for custody, hasn't he?" Grace's throat tightened. "He claims I'm mentally unfit to raise my child. His PR team's been leaking stories about me. The unstable wife, the neglected pregnancy." Hale sighed. "He's using the oldest playbook there is. When a powerful man feels threatened, he paints a woman as hysterical." "Don't play that game, Grace. Stay steady. We'll work quietly." She nodded, though her mind was a storm of fear and defiance. "I don't want the money for revenge," she said. "I just want a life that's mine." Hale smiled faintly. "Then earn it the way your mother did, by building it yourself." He handed her a business card. "There's someone you should meet. He oversees part of the Hartwell portfolio, a man named Ethan March. He doesn't talk much, but he's sharp, loyal, and knows how to make ghosts disappear from public records. He might be exactly what you need." Grace slipped the card into her bag, unaware that the name Ethan March would soon carve its way into her life like destiny. That night, as the rain returned, Grace drove north toward the Hartwell coastal estate, a property she hadn't seen since childhood. The highway lights blurred through the windshield, the rhythm of the wipers syncing with her heartbeat. The storm was heavier than before. Her phone buzzed with messages from unknown numbers, tabloids fishing for quotes, headlines spreading faster than truth. Bennett's pregnant ex spirals after divorce. Grace Holloway under psychiatric evaluation. She threw the phone into the passenger seat, her eyes burning. Thunder cracked overhead. The car swerved as a truck splashed past, and for a moment her vision doubled. Exhaustion, hunger, fear. She gripped the wheel tighter. Then, in the distance, a pair of headlights appeared in her lane. The sound came before the pain. Metal on metal, glass exploding, the world flipping upside down. She woke to white, sterile, endless white. The hum of machines, the smell of antiseptic. "Miss Holloway, can you hear me?" A calm, male voice. Grace blinked, disoriented. A doctor leaned over her, his badge reading Dr. Ethan March. His hair was slightly unkempt, his eyes kind but tired. The kind of tired that comes from carrying other people's pain too long. "You were in a car accident," he said gently. "You and your baby are lucky. You lost a lot of blood, but we managed to stabilize both of you." Grace's breath trembled. "My baby?" "You delivered early," Ethan said. "Triplets, 2 boys and a girl. They're premature, but strong. You'll see them soon." Triplets. The word barely fit in her head. Tears slid silently down her temples. Ethan hesitated, then added quietly, "Someone brought you in before the ambulance arrived. No one knows who. They left before we could thank them." Grace turned her face toward the window. Outside, rain streaked the glass. Slow, steady, almost tender. She remembered nothing, only the flash of light, the impact, the darkness. Somewhere in that darkness, a choice had been made: to live. Days later, she was discharged from the hospital, weaker but alive. Her babies remained in the NICU, Ava by her side every day, refusing to leave. The tabloids had already twisted the crash into scandal, calling it a failed suicide attempt. Marcus's team had moved fast, too fast. Grace's name was trending for all the wrong reasons. Unstable, reckless, unfit. She scrolled through comments until the words blurred together like static. That night in her hospital room, Ethan appeared at the door. "You shouldn't read that," he said quietly. Grace didn't look up. "It's hard not to. The whole world thinks I'm insane." Ethan leaned against the wall, his voice calm. "The world loves broken women. They make better headlines, but I don't think you're broken. Just burning." Grace looked at him, startled. He shrugged slightly. "Fire can destroy, or it can forge. Depends on how you use it." For a moment, neither spoke. The monitors hummed softly, steady as a heartbeat. "Why are you here?" she asked finally. "Because Graham Hale asked me to check on you," he said. "And because I wanted to." Grace smiled faintly, the first real smile in weeks. "I don't even know what comes next." "Then start with breathing," Ethan replied. "Then decide what you're fighting for." He slipped a small velvet box onto the bedside table, a silver pendant engraved with a single word: courage. "Your mother left this with Hale," he said. "She wanted you to have it when the time was right." Grace held the pendant in her palm. Its cool metal seemed to pulse with warmth. "It's beautiful." Ethan nodded. "So are second chances." That night, after he left, Grace sat in silence, the city lights flickering beyond the hospital window. She watched the reflection of her face, pale, thin, but alive, and whispered to herself, "I'm not done yet." Outside, rain began to fall again, washing the glass clean. Somewhere beneath that endless sky, a woman who had lost everything was learning to rise. Not because someone saved her, but because she finally decided to save herself. The ocean roared outside the old Hartwell cottage, its waves crashing against the cliffs like applause from another world. Grace Holloway stood by the window, wrapped in a soft gray sweater, watching the storm-tossed water. 3 months had passed since the accident. Her children, 2 boys and a girl, were finally strong enough to leave the hospital. Their names whispered through the air like prayers: Noah, Jack, and Emma. Tiny lives, fragile yet fierce, sleeping peacefully in bassinets near the fire. The cottage smelled of sea salt and cedar, the scent of survival. Ava Cole had found this place for her, far from the noise, far from Manhattan's cruel spotlight. But even distance couldn't stop the whispers. Grace's name still drifted across headlines. Ex-socialite in hiding. Grace Holloway's breakdown. Marcus Bennett speaks out. Each lie was sharper than truth, polished by PR machines designed to destroy. On the screen of her phone, the latest article glared back at her. Bennett claims ex-wife abandoned children for fortune. She tossed the phone aside, her pulse quickening. Ava looked up from her laptop across the table. "Don't read them, Grace," she said gently. "They're not written for people like us. They're written to keep women afraid." Grace exhaled, shaking her head. "He's winning, Ava. Every time I stay silent, he grows louder." "Then stop being silent," Ava said, closing the laptop. "We fight back, on your terms." Grace turned toward her friend, eyes burning with exhaustion and resolve. "I'm not strong enough for war," Ava smiled faintly. "You don't have to be strong. You just have to be steady." That night, as the children slept, Grace opened her mother's old chest, a weathered trunk she had found in the attic. Inside were letters, photos, and documents from Hartwell Holdings, the family company that had once built half of New York's skyline. Her mother, Eleanor, had left notes written in careful ink. "Never let them tell your story for you. Own your truth, even if it breaks you." Grace read the line again and again until the words blurred. The next morning, she called Ava. "We're going public," she said simply. Ava froze. "Grace, are you sure?" "Yes, if Marcus wants to fight with stories, I'll tell mine. All of it." 3 weeks later, the world stopped to watch. In a small press room filled with reporters, Grace Holloway stood behind a podium. Cameras flashed, microphones buzzed. The woman who had once been branded unstable now looked unshakable. Her hair pulled back, her eyes clear and cold. The pendant courage rested against her collarbone, glinting in the light. "3 months ago," she began, her voice steady, "I was left alone, pregnant, bankrupt, and branded by lies. I was told I was unfit to be a mother, that I was broken, unstable, and irrelevant. But I am here today to say this: women do not break that easily." The room fell silent. Grace continued. "For years, my life was managed by someone else's narrative, by wealth, power, and media. But truth is not a press release. Truth has a heartbeat, and mine never stopped." She paused, her eyes meeting the cameras directly. "To any woman watching, if you've been silenced, humiliated, or made to believe you are less than what you are, listen carefully. You do not need their permission to exist. You are allowed to begin again." Applause broke the stillness. Within hours, her speech went viral, shared, reposted, and quoted across the internet. Truth Has a Face trended worldwide. Women from every corner of the country flooded social media with their own stories, their own scars. For the first time, Grace wasn't the victim of a narrative. She was the author of one. But Marcus Bennett wasn't finished. In the weeks that followed, Grace's rise triggered a counterattack. Anonymous accounts began leaking photos, messages, and medical reports. The tabloids claimed she had manipulated public sympathy for money. News outlets replayed her old interviews, twisting her words into confessions she never made. At night, as she rocked baby Emma to sleep, Grace could feel the weight of the war pressing against the walls. "They want me to disappear," she whispered. Ethan March had been visiting regularly, helping her manage the Hartwell Trust's finances and quietly rebuilding her life. One evening, he found her sitting alone on the porch, her laptop open to another hateful article. "Stop feeding the fire," he said softly. Grace didn't look up. "It's already burning." Ethan sat beside her, watching the ocean in silence. "You can't control what they say, but you can control what you do next." Grace turned to him. "And what's that?" He met her gaze, his voice calm but firm. "You take your truth to court." It took months of preparation. Ava gathered evidence, subpoenaed documents, and tracked down witnesses. Among them was Amber Lewis, Marcus's former assistant, a nervous young woman with shaking hands and haunted eyes. When she met Grace, she burst into tears. "I thought I was helping him," Amber confessed. "He said it was just reputation management. I didn't know he'd hurt you." Grace placed a hand on hers. "You can still make it right." Amber nodded. "I have copies, emails, recordings, everything, but if I testify, he'll come after me." Grace's heart sank. "Then we'll protect you." But 2 days before the hearing, Amber's car was found at the bottom of the Hudson. Official reports called it an accident. Ava didn't believe it. Neither did Grace. When the news broke, Grace felt something inside her fracture, not her strength, but her illusion that truth alone would be enough. That night she sat by the fire, holding the pendant Courage so tightly it left an imprint on her skin. "She died because of me," she whispered. Ethan shook his head. "She died because she tried to stop a monster. Don't let that be in vain." Winter arrived. Snow began to fall over the cottage, softening the jagged world. Grace looked out at the white horizon, feeling both grief and clarity. Pain had burned her clean. She was no longer the woman who signed papers in silence. The courtroom loomed ahead like a storm, and this time she wouldn't hide from it. She opened her laptop, typed a new message, and hit send to the press. "I will testify in my own defense. The truth doesn't need protection. It needs witnesses." As snow fell outside, the world began to shift. Grace Holloway wasn't running anymore. She was walking straight into the fire, the kind that destroys lies and leaves only truth behind. Snow fell softly over Manhattan, a quiet contradiction to the chaos brewing below. The city glittered like a jewelry box turned upside down, fragile, bright, deceptive. Inside the courthouse on Center Street, the air was electric. Reporters clustered like vultures, microphones aimed at the marble steps, signs waved in the crowd. Truth has a face, justice for Grace, silence no more. Inside courtroom 5B, Grace Holloway sat between her attorney, Ava Cole, and Graham Hale. Her hair was pinned back, her suit black and simple. Around her, the hum of whispers, journalists, lawyers, spectators. In the front row sat Ethan March, expression unreadable, hands clasped tightly. Across the aisle, Marcus Bennett, immaculate in a navy suit, exuded calm arrogance, his lips curled in a faint practiced smile. His PR team sat behind him, whispering strategy. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but everyone knew the world was watching anyway. The judge entered. "This court is now in session." Grace's pulse thudded like distant thunder. Ava rose. "Your Honor, my client, Grace Holloway, stands accused by Mr. Marcus Bennett of defamation, emotional manipulation, and parental unfitness. We will prove that not only are these claims false, they are a calculated attempt to silence a woman who dared to expose the truth." Marcus's lawyer, a smooth man with a voice made for control, adjusted his tie. "Your Honor, this is not a crusade for women's rights. This is a case about instability, about a woman who fabricated trauma to regain fame and fortune." The words stung, but Grace didn't flinch. She had learned the power of stillness, how silence could slice sharper than anger. As witnesses took the stand, the courtroom transformed into theater. Marcus's assistant, his doctor, his PR manager, each rehearsed, each hollow. They painted Grace as volatile, emotional, unstable. A woman consumed by jealousy, a mother unfit to raise her own children. Grace watched them with quiet sadness. She had once believed these people were her friends. Now she saw the emptiness behind their eyes, loyalty bought by fear and salary. When Ava cross-examined, she dismantled their stories piece by piece, every question slicing clean. "Mr. Dorian," Ava asked, her voice calm, "you testified that Ms. Holloway attempted suicide. Do you have medical proof of that claim?" The man stammered. I was told by Mr. Bennett's team." He hesitated. "Yes." No further questions. Each witness fell the same way, under the weight of their own contradictions. The truth was heavy, and lies could never hold it long. Then came Marcus Bennett's turn. He walked to the stand with the smoothness of a man who had rehearsed confidence. He smiled at the judge, adjusted his cufflinks, and placed his hand on the Bible. "Mr. Bennett," Ava began, "you were once married to Ms. Holloway?" "Yes." "You filed for divorce while she was 7 months pregnant?" "I did what was necessary." "For whom?" He smirked. "For everyone involved." Ava paced slowly, deliberate. "You also froze her financial accounts, revoked her credit cards, and hired a private PR team to manage media narratives about her mental state, correct? That's a distortion. So you didn't hire a team?" "I did. But for damage control—" "What damage?" "Her public behavior." Ava turned, locking eyes with the judge. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit Exhibit 14, a private recording obtained by Amber Lewis, Mr. Bennett's former assistant." The courtroom rustled. Marcus's expression flickered. Ava pressed play. From the speakers, his voice filled the room, cold, calculating, unmistakable. "Make her look unstable. Feed the press something tragic. Once she breaks, she loses everything." A collective gasp rippled through the room. The sound was unmistakable, the monster behind the mask. Marcus's face drained of color. His lawyer stammered objections, but the damage was done. The judge silenced the room with a single gavel strike. "Mr. Bennett," the judge said sternly, "this is your voice?" Marcus hesitated. It's been edited." Ava stepped forward. "Forensic analysis confirms authenticity, Your Honor." Silence. Grace didn't move. Her heart beat steady, her expression calm. The war for truth was no longer metaphor. It was unfolding in front of the world. When the recess was called, Marcus stormed out, trailed by his lawyers. Grace remained seated, staring at her folded hands. For the first time in months, her shoulders relaxed. Ethan approached quietly. "It's over," he whispered. She shook her head. "Not yet, but soon." Outside, snow continued to fall, muting the city's noise. It felt like mercy. The verdict came 3 days later. The judge's voice echoed through the courtroom. "The court finds in favor of Grace Holloway. Full custody of her children is hereby granted. The defamation suit is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, the court orders an investigation into Marcus Bennett's financial and personal conduct." Gasps, then applause. Some cried. Marcus stood motionless, his empire cracking invisibly behind his eyes. For the first time, he looked small, not because Grace had destroyed him, but because he had destroyed himself. Grace turned to him, her gaze steady. "You taught me what control feels like," she said quietly. "Now I know what freedom feels like. I don't need revenge. I have peace." She walked out of the courtroom as the crowd erupted. Cameras flashed, microphones surged. She didn't stop. Outside, snowflakes melted on her cheeks like blessings. Weeks passed. Marcus's company collapsed under investigation. His sponsors withdrew. His board ousted him. The man who once owned the narrative was now the story himself. Grace didn't celebrate. She didn't need to. Instead, she launched the Holloway Foundation for Women, using part of her inheritance to fund legal aid, mental health programs, and shelters for survivors of abuse. Her first public statement was simple. Power doesn't corrupt people, fear does, and the only cure for fear is truth. Her story became a movement. Seminars, interviews, college talks. But Grace didn't chase fame. She chased change. Each life touched by her work became proof that pain could become purpose. Ethan remained beside her, quietly steadfast. One evening, as they watched the sunset from the rooftop of the foundation building, he said softly, "You could have disappeared. You chose to rise instead." Grace smiled faintly. Because disappearing is what he wanted. Rising is what I needed. He handed her the same Mont Blanc pen she had once used to sign her divorce papers. "Thought you might want this back." Grace held it, studying its weight. "Funny," she said. "The same pen that ended my life helped me start a new one." She clicked it open and signed the final document to register the foundation's expansion. Snow fell gently outside the window, the city glowing beneath it. For a moment, the world was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like closure, symbolism and themes, snow, forgiveness and clarity, pain purified into peace. Pen, reclaiming control over her own narrative. Courtroom, transformation from victim to advocate. Justice, not punishment, but illumination, the truth made visible. Message, real power isn't about destroying your enemies. It's about refusing to let them destroy who you are. Morning light spilled through the penthouse windows like gold poured into glass. The skyline of New York stretched endlessly before Grace Holloway, gleaming and calm. A city that once buried her, now reflecting her rise. She stood barefoot near the balcony, the wind playing with the ends of her white silk robe, her coffee untouched. Below, the world moved on, but for the first time in years, she didn't have to chase it. It had been almost a year since the trial. The Holloway Foundation for Women had grown beyond her wildest hopes. Offices in 6 cities, partnerships with hospitals and legal networks, and a hotline that never stopped ringing. Thousands of women she'd never met now whispered her name as both a person and a promise. Grace means survival. She had reclaimed her last name not as a memory of pain, but as a declaration of purpose. Ethan March walked in quietly, 2 steaming mugs in hand. "You're awake early," he said. Grace smiled faintly. "Couldn't sleep. The city feels different today." "Peaceful? Temporary," she said with a soft laugh. He handed her the coffee. "Maybe peace doesn't have to last forever. Maybe it's just something we borrow between storms." She looked at him, the man who had seen her broken, bleeding, burning, and realized how strange it felt to be whole again. Later that week, Grace stood before a packed auditorium at Columbia University, delivering the keynote speech for the Voices of Resilience conference. Cameras rolled, flashes sparked, but she felt none of the old panic, only clarity. "When I lost everything," she told the audience, "I thought the world had ended. But endings aren't real. They're just mirrors, showing you who you were before you become who you're meant to be." She paused, scanning the faces. Young women, survivors, mothers, students. They called me unstable, hysterical, dangerous, but what they really meant was uncontrollable. The moment I stopped needing approval, I became powerful. Applause thundered through the hall. Some stood, some cried. Grace smiled, humbled but firm. Outside, as the evening fell, she watched the snow beginning again, faint, like ash turned into peace. That night, she returned home to the coastal estate she had restored, the same Hartwell cottage where her rebirth began. The air smelled of salt and pine. The children were asleep upstairs, their laughter still echoing faintly through the halls. In the living room, a fire crackled softly, painting gold against the walls. Ethan waited by the fireplace, holding a small black box. "What's this?" Grace asked, amused. He opened it. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, a single diamond set in silver. "Nothing fancy," Ethan said. "Just honest." Grace's eyes softened. You already gave me everything I didn't know I needed. Then let me give you one more thing, he said, stepping closer. A promise, not to save you. You never needed that. Just to walk beside you, however far this road goes. Tears welled in her eyes, quiet and real. I don't need forever, she whispered. Just a life where I'm not afraid to begin again. He smiled. Then begin with me. The wedding was small, private. Just friends, family, and the sea. Grace wore a gown the color of morning clouds, her pendant, courage resting over her heart. Ava stood beside her as maid of honor, Graham Hale watching proudly from the front row. When she signed the marriage certificate, she used the same Mont Blanc pen that had once ended her marriage to Marcus Bennett. Her hand didn't shake this time. The pen glided smoothly, as if writing not an ending, but a resurrection. As the ceremony ended, snow began to fall. Light, pure, endless. The world felt still. Ethan took her hand. You okay? Grace nodded, smiling through quiet tears. It's strange. I used to think storms meant chaos. Now they just remind me that I survived. That evening, after the guests left and the laughter faded, Grace stood alone on the balcony, watching the horizon fade into night. The sea below shimmered silver under the moonlight. Behind her, soft music drifted from inside. The twins asleep, Emma curled up with a storybook on the couch. She closed her eyes, breathing in the calm. And then, a sound. The faint click of heels on stone. A waiter approached, holding a small silver tray. Mrs. March, he said, smiling politely. A message was left for you. Grace frowned. From who? He didn't say. On the tray sat a single white envelope, sealed in the black wax. Her name, Grace Holloway March, written in elegant, unfamiliar script. Her pulse quickened. She broke the seal. Inside, one line written in slanted ink. He didn't do it alone. Her breath caught. The edges of the paper trembled between her fingers. The fireplace inside flickered, casting moving shadows across the room. For a long moment, Grace said nothing. Then she folded the letter neatly, placed it beside her pendant on the table, and whispered to herself, Then I'll find who did. The wind rose, carrying her words into the night. Snow drifted against the balcony rails, soft, unending, cleansing. Grace Holloway stood beneath the falling sky, no longer a victim, no longer a survivor, but something rarer, a woman reborn, steady and bright, walking fearlessly into whatever shadows still waited for her.